details and the hush money payment and all of that. I want to bring in Jeffrey Tsai, a former federal prosecutor who worked on a case that many say has parallels to what we're seeing play out right now. The defendant in that case, John Edwards, who was accused of using campaign money to hide an affair while he was running for president. Jeffrey, thanks for being here with us. In your case, Edwards' mistress, Rielle Hunter, never took the stand. So I'm curious what you think of this decision by the prosecution to call Stormy Daniels.
Well, I think that one of the issues that you're seeing now, especially with the motion that the defense just posted with the court, is this idea that sometimes too much is too much. And for the prosecution, the central thesis behind their theory of the case is context is everything, right? So everything that goes back to 2011 to 2016 is absolutely crucial to understanding what then happened in 2016. In the Edwards case, you had a slightly different scenario, at least different in the sense that fundamentally the root of that case was whether or not donor money that was coming in was in fact campaign contributions that should have been reported. That was the root of that particular matter. Here, it is and it isn't at the same time for the prosecution. They want to be able to tether themselves to the idea, the prosecution, that this case is no different than any other white-collar fraud case that's about documents and the falsification of those documents. But they still need to, on a more nebulous level, as compared to the Edwards case, show that there was something about the campaign itself that was at issue. So here, in putting Stormy Daniels on the stand, the prosecution is going right at it. But they're also at the same time opening themselves up, as you can see through the motion for a mistrial, some of the dangers that can come along. One last point I'll make about what you saw in the Edwards case is you can't sometimes control your witness, and that's always an issue for the prosecution to consider.
It's worth pointing out in your case, the jury famously acquitted John Edwards on one charge, deadlocked on all the others, and that led DOJ ultimately to drop the case, right? But it is interesting and instructive, I think, to show now what some of those jurors in your case told NBC after they came to a verdict, or no verdict.
Well, I'm
going to play a little bit of what they told us at that time.
I would say it didn't make the burden of proof. It wasn't there, the evidence.
I think he was guilty, but like we said, the evidence just was not there for us to prove guilt.
They also said, Jeffrey, they were uncomfortable with using campaign finance laws to punish a candidate's personal misdeeds. And we know that this is a very novel approach that's being used by the Manhattan DA to take what at the start of it was a misdemeanor and elevate it to a low-level felony. So in that sense, could prosecutors today have a similar challenge that they'll think either that the evidence isn't there or they're just uncomfortable with the idea of using campaign finance laws, which in the end they think is to cover up a personal story?
In a word, yes. The problem in big, high-profile cases like this that have salacious details and allegations that are typically on tabloid headlines is that it opens the door to the prosecution doing too much at times. And when that happens, it forces a juror, or in this case, 12 jury members, to have to now debate amongst themselves what is just salacious allegation meant to make someone look bad versus what they're being asked to actually judge in terms of the facts to the law. And what I would say in this instance is, just like almost every other trial we see, and this one I don't think is going to be any different, is the jurors are going to take their jobs pretty seriously. And so with all of the salacious details that are coming out, the prosecution has a pretty big job right now to make sure that they don't do too much of it. So what we see in a potential limiting instruction is likely going to be, if the government has any kind of pin on this, is to write something of such a nature that ultimately benefits them. And what they're going to write in there is that some of those details as to whether or not it was true or not true ultimately is not for the jury to find. The reason why that still benefits the government, if the judge ultimately gives an instruction of that nature, is it tends to reinforce this idea that whether it's true or not true doesn't matter, because context still matters. It's the underlying motivation of what then caused allegedly Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen to do what they're accused of doing.
Jeffrey Tsai, thank you so much for coming on the program.
And now let's go back into the courtroom and the document here. What's happening on the stand is